Good afternoon. My name's Ron Orr. I am presently in my master's in applied leadership and management at Arizona State University at Thunderbird School of Global Management. I am taking a statistical analysis class. It's TAM 530. And what I'd like to do today is present to you an analysis I performed as my final. And this analysis is based on previous data that we acquired. It's from a company that has four companies across the world in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York. Within these companies, they've marked down product, and my job is to go see if this product, the amount of money they made from this project, was beneficial to the company and their total sales. So let's go ahead and begin. So the first test I had to evaluate the variables, of course, and determine what tests I wanted to run to prove my hypothesis. You don't see my hypothesis here, but basically, it's the total sales of the company will trend upwards during the promotional markdowns in the four companies in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York. In order to prove this hypothesis, I'm going to do a frequency and explore analysis to determine if my variables are valid within my data set and determine if I have any outliers that will affect my analysis. I will then do a correlation analysis to determine if unemployment rates, the temperature, and the week of the year when purchases were made affected these four locations. I will then do an ANOVA analysis to determine the statistics within and between the Munich, Dubai, London, and New York variables to predict these sales amongst each company during the markdowns. Lastly, I'll do a regression analysis to analyze the data of the four companies' sales during their promotional markdowns and to predict if it affected the total sales for the business. So the first test, like I said, is a frequency analysis. I performed this analysis to determine if there's any missing data within my analysis. And as you see below, there's 208 variables and none are missing. So this proved very good for my analysis. This is very important so I qualify my variable data sets in this analysis as I move forward. Before I performed a frequency analysis, I cleaned up the data within SPSS to allow a better understanding. I actually changed the decimal points so I could see the last two from cents, and I realized there was an error in the total sales that did not include the sales from the markdown 5 for the total sales, meaning that when you add up 1 through 5, they didn't add up to the total sales. I found out that it was missing 5. I went in, fixed that, and now I could perform my analysis. I performed an analysis to better interpret the data for the total markdowns of total sales. When I viewed SPSS, it caused me to pause in a few areas that I have to evaluate further. The first was minimum sales in the markdown, which is a negative balance. And I also noticed that the skewness was above 3 that will have to be evaluated further. For any SPSS output, if you'd like to see it, it's at the end of this presentation in backup slides. It's just too much data to be put in this presentation. So next, I performed an explore analysis. I chose to explore and analyze each of the variables that I will be using to prove my hypothesis. To begin, the KS and SW test for normality demonstrates that each are statistically significant. As you see here, they're all under P equals under 0.05. During my explore analysis, I had high values outside of the expected range, as will be seen in the next few slides, or like I said earlier, will be in the backup slides. This caused me to evaluate each outlier to determine why they exist within my data before I move forward with my ANOVA regression analysis. As you see in the store and markdown 1, I had outliers in number 47, 161, and number 5. Until I can obtain additional information from each of these locations, Munich, Dubai, London, New York, I'm going to have to keep these outliers to perform my analysis. I just don't have enough time to go out and contact these individuals. So the same thing existed with my explore analysis in markdown 2 with the stores. As you can see, there's a considerable more outliers. Um, but number 52, 104, and 208 was actually increased due to holidays. So therefore, I'm going to leave them anyway. Number 53 and 157, as you see below, um, I will have to once again go out and review that data. So when I was reviewing the data in Excel and in SPSS, I found out there was a negative $10.50 value. You could actually see it below as well within this data if you can see it. It's very small, but you could go to my output in SPSS and review that some more. It actually showed a negative $10 balance. This caused me some concern that someone entered the data incorrectly. So I removed this amount and changed it to the mean after removing the data initially to zero it out. I calculated the mean and then added that mean into where that $10.50 was. As you could see from the data, that changed the mean, which in turn I had to change my analysis. As you see here, my second exploration for each store in the markdown 2, the variable did change in the mean for New York, and that's where I found the negative $10 balance. If you look at the minimum, it's no longer minus $10. Once again, same thing with stores in markdown 3 as the previous. I did have outliers in 47.99 and 151 and 203. Actually, these were all due to a holiday, so I will move on with my analysis. Same thing again, everything P is under 0.5. It makes it statistically significant, just like the previous Explore analysis I did on the markdowns. And once again, I chose to keep the outliers until I could obtain additional information to determine if these were mistakes or if they were actual dollar values that I would have to equate into my analysis. So I went ahead and equated them into my analysis until I found out more information. Same thing with number 5, markdown 5. Actually, this was statistically significant. Non-significant for Munich. The p-value is actually 0.220, which exceeds the 0.05. So in this case, in my Explore analysis, showed me that it was non-significant. So this is going to cause me to evaluate this data even further as I go down into my ANOVA and my linear regression analysis. So once again, as you've seen from the previous ones, the total sales, it did show all of the outliers within this. And once again, it's either a holiday or it was additional data that I'm going to have to get from one of or all of these companies to determine any more additional data. So as you see in my unemployment explorer, there was no outliers. This data was actually statistically significant below the point or 0.05. Same with the week, no outliers. Everything's looking good. Same thing with the temperature. However, Munich was kind of close at 0.034. That does kind of cause you some pause to take a look at that as you're moving forward in your analysis. But still, it is statistically significant at 0.05 or below 0.05. So then what I decided then, the results that I had for my frequency and explore, I determined there's no missing data from the variables that I will review during my analysis. And I did find that there were quite a few outliers from the explore analysis that will have to be evaluated further. With the exception of the holidays that I believe you want to see an increase in pay during the markdown items. Or excuse me, not pay, but the amount of money you make. Next, I did a correlation analysis. The correlation analysis was to statistically evaluate the strength of the relationship between the two numerically measured continuous variables. I chose this type of analysis to establish there's a possible connection between variables. I did this for markdowns affected by the total sales by the company, and if so, how much? And I did a correlation analysis for unemployment the weeks of the year and temperature to determine if they were positively correlated to the markdowns. To see the output through SPSS, please go to the backup slides at the end of the presentation, but my results are as follows. For markdown and total sales, as I expected, there's a positive correlation between each markdown to total sales by store. However, it wasn't as big as I thought. As seen by the correlation analysis and scatter plots seen between the two variables, markdown 1 was 71% and significant. It had the biggest positive correlation to total sales, and markdown 5 was the least at 36%. Of course, this data varies based on the store location, but overall, the markdowns were positively correlated to the total sales as expected. Furthermore, as I expected for unemployment weeks and temperature, there is not a positive correlation between unemployment or any of these. However, I did find that for markdown 3 and 4, the correlation was significant. Looking further into the data, and although significant, I don't believe that the temperatures had an effect on these markdowns. 15%, 19%, and 21% in the sales they received. Next, I performed a ANOVA analysis to determine whether there are any statistical significant differences between the means of my 5 markdowns in the stores. The one-way ANOVA compares the means between these 5 groups, and stores will determine whether any of these means are statistically significant different from each other. And this will allow me to test my null hypothesis. I did not use a t-test for this test to compare the means of only 2 of my populations. Therefore, testing more than 2 leads me to running an ANOVA. Overall, for markdown in stores, I rejected a null hypothesis. The p-value was under 0.05. And as you see from my f-test, was more than 0.05. F3204 equals 10.62. P-value was 0.001. And once again, if you'd like to see the documentation on this, please refer to the support documentation. And I did reject my null hypothesis. However, on markdown 2, I could not reject a null hypothesis because the p-value 0.220, like we've seen before, is over 0.05. Therefore, my variable had the same values instead of different. Same thing with markdown 3. I could not reject a null hypothesis for my markdown. The p-value is 0.964, underneath or well over the 0.05. Therefore, my variables had the same values. Just like the first one, markdown 4 and markdown 5, I rejected a null hypothesis and went with the alternative hypothesis because their values were different, and they are different. Total sales, once again, I rejected a null hypothesis to support the alternative hypothesis because there was a statistically significant difference. As you can see, the analysis, understanding its data, I then rejected the null hypothesis. Lastly, I performed a linear regression analysis. I chose to use the simple analysis for each single independent variable. I started to do one in multiple linear regression and determined that it was constant and really non-significant to run all of it at the same time. That way I could find out within each of my markdowns and the effect on the total sales. First of all, I rejected null hypothesis and support the alternative because there's a linear relationship between markdown 1 and the total sales. I did the same with 2, 3, 4, and 5 and the total sales. You could see this by my presentation and the analysis and how that was determined for all the markdowns. Every one of the null hypothesis rejected, and the alternative hypothesis was adopted because there's a linear relationship between all of them. So my results can be seen in each of my analysis documentation preceding this slide within the support documentation. However, overall, during my ANOVA analysis, I determined there were no relationship with the data between markdown 2 and 3, and I could reject the null hypothesis. Furthermore, I realized that through a linear regression analysis, the first markdowns across the company was accounting for 50% of the variance for total sales, while the second and fifth only accounted for 13. So what is my recommendation to the company? Looking at the data and the outliers, I identified I must find out more information from each company other than what was sold during the holidays. Once I can understand these outliers, the data could be more consistent across the four companies. Also, to further my analysis, I need to analyze the data and determine if markdowns are good from the company. One must first have all the profits available on what the entire company has made in that 52 weeks. Once this information is known, then I can make a rational decision on whether our five markdowns were beneficial in Munich, Dubai, London, and New York. Furthermore, based solely on the data presented in my analysis, our company is not making a substantial increase in profits by marking down our products in London. As seen by the additional data below, London is only making 8.65% of our total sales with markdown product, which equates to 369,000. With that said, with the inability of selling markdown products in London, I would alleviate this and look at other alternatives for our London store. Thank you very much. And like I said, if you would like to see additional information, it's in this presentation on the backup slides. This is a very quick presentation to be able to demonstrate all the analytical information that is necessary on something this big, but I hope you enjoyed the presentation.